Okay, we're here in the crisp Davos evening with India's private equity whiz Manish Kejriwal. Pleasure to have you here, Manish.
Lovely being here, Namrata. Sorry to have got you out in the cold. She wanted to do this inside. I said outside is where Davos is, so we're outdoors.
I'm well bundled up, so I've got my hand warmers and toe warmers and this big fur scarf in place. Okay, let's talk business then.
Sure.
And I've heard a lot about CEO optimism, especially India optimism, despite a talk of a global India fatigue. Manish, you're going to be more candid than that, aren't you?
I'm always candid with you.
Okay, so tell me about that. India's relevance doesn't seem to be very hot in 2013 here in Davos.
No, listen, I think if you look at Davos, I think if you're Indian, we become self-centered and think the world revolves around us. It doesn't, right? There are multiple flashpoints around the globe. There's a ton of discussion on Europe. I think a year ago, there was a lot more despondency and negativism because there was a thing that Europe might have crashed. We've survived. And it's just not Europe crashing. If that had happened, we would have had ripples all across the world, including India. So I think people need to recognize we've had a terrific 2012 from the depths and the bottom of a complete lack of optimism. The fact about India being relevant or not, okay, listen, it's the second largest contingent of people in Davos are Indians. But I think you're absolutely right. India is definitely not the focus. If you look at the sort of panels where India's not, but that's not a reflection of anything else except, what we've partly done to ourselves as a country in the last 12 to 18 months. I think a couple of ministers here who said the same thing to you or to some other reporters. So I think we should take that with a bit of pinch of salt. I think from a last 18-month perspective, at the macro level, there have been some issues. I think we've all been very pleased with what's happened more recently in the last 60 days.
Right.
But to answer your question in short, absolutely, India is definitely not the flavor of the day. It hasn't been. And we should not have expected that Davos would change that in any way, irrespective of the number of buses we have which go around saying Incredible India.
Okay, yes, somebody talked about how the focus should be credible India and not just incredible India.
Sure.
But, okay, just back to private equity investments. So there are two reasons for this. One, the fact that, as you said, politics has played a spoiled sport, and especially GAR and the government's stand on that. And second is the slowing growth in India.
Yeah.
So is that going to be a dampener in 2013 as well? How much of private equity investment do you see coming in?
So let me go to the second one first, because I think that's the real economy, that's real India. Forget about private equity, doesn't really matter. And I'll get back to private. I'm not avoiding your question. We'll get back to private equity. But the second point about the India story or the slow, there's been a temporary slowdown in growth. But if you look at the secular story of India, we are way above the average, the global average. And if people like me or the industry didn't believe in India's secular growth rate, we wouldn't be doing what we're doing. So you're talking to a biased party. Having said that, the Indian growth story, are you going to have speed bumps? Of course you are. Is it dead or over? Absolutely not. So I'm going to say, irrespective of what I said earlier, I'm very optimistic on the India growth story. Will it be with hiccups the next 2 or 3 years? Of course it will be. Will you sometimes think it's the end of the world? You might even think that way. But we have a terrific way of getting around those issues. We've seen it in the last 5 or 10 years. Anyone who's been in India the last 20 years, you've seen the number of hiccups we've had. But no matter what we do to ourselves at the macro level, the rural growth, the growth of the middle class, the trickle down, it's actually happening. I mean, of course, there's going to be slowdowns. But the story that you should see in the next 5 or 10 years, I would say would be better. You would be in the top 5 percentile of economies in the world in terms of pure growth. Now, are they challenges? Of course they are. Which is why it's important for guys like us to be very selective in what we do. At a macro level, there are issues. So I always say, top down, there are huge issues. Bottom up, the story is not that badly broken.
But Manish, when you were at Temasek, you invested, hugely in various sectors and the top-notch companies, the likes of Bharati, M&M, and so forth. You had $3 billion in terms of assets under management. Now, when you, have your own fund, how difficult is it to lure foreign investors at a time where conditions are like this?
Sure. So, firstly, it wasn't $3 billion. We won't even talk about it. It was a little bit higher than that, but we won't get into that. And I'm happy to talk about that separately. And that was a great 8-year stretch that we had. I think instead of taking any of the things at a personal level and how good the investments were, I think one of the biggest things, to be absolutely frank, was the timing. We came in 2004, we really rode the wave. Like many others, we also deployed money in 07, 08. The returns we made of our 04, 05 investments were substantially higher than the returns we made in our 07, 08. But that's life. Are you going to make a few mistakes? Of course you are. If you don't make a few mistakes, damn it, you haven't taken enough risk. So you mentioned Mahindra. Of course, we invested that in 03, 04. That was a terrific investment. It was, over a 5x. I mean, Anand is... and look at the company today. When you talk about the India story being broken, I don't see that at Mahindra. I don't see that at Bajaj. I don't see that at many of the other automotive companies. So where's the growth broken? It's not broken, in my mind. Your second question is very different, which is what's happening to investors. And for a moment, we won't talk about Kedaara, because I'm not supposed to talk about Kedaara. But if you look at foreign investors, the last 18 months has been terrible for India. And I'm not talking just about the limited partners like pension funds and sovereigns who invest in funds like Kedaara, but I'm also talking more broadly in FII and FDI terms. And there are many reasons for that. I think the ones most often talked about is, okay, there's GAR issues and there's this issues and there's government not doing X, Y, Z. That's all fine. I mean, listen, we've always been in situations where that happens. I think the other issue, which we don't talk about that often, frankly, is, it's just the way perception, I'm not saying media is you, but the foreign media, it's a ricochet from 07, 08. If you remember, if you go back to 07, 08, there was nothing that could go wrong with India. And I called it the FT or the Wall Street Journal effect. I mean, I love those two articles. I read them all the time. But every article in those, you go back to those 2 years, there was not a single negative article. Okay, I'm exaggerating. It must have been one or a single article. Mm-hmm. And today, there's nothing positive, irrespective of how good news there is out of India. I remember the recent article of a certain global automotive company coming into India. In 07, 08, that same fact would have been dressed up and say, oh, one other global OEM discovers India. Today, it was questioning the sensibility of the management team of going into India. So again, the same fact, but a very different lens in 07, 08, a very different lens today. So I think there are a bunch of investors who just get scared by what they read in the popular press. Right. And I think those guys we've lost, because you can't control that.
But what about smart money? That's where you're getting your money from.
So,
right?
Yeah, again, I know Namrata, I'm going to be you're extremely smart and get stuff out of me, but we've been humbled, and I would say humbled, by the interest we've seen in our fund. Okay, but I'll keep that aside for a second. And I think the guys who invested behind us have really been the guys who know India for a much longer time. I think the people who've just come in the 07, 08 time frame, many of them, unfortunately, have either been burnt or taken haircuts, or they haven't seen significant exits. Maybe in 5 years or in 10 years, they also will recover and make good exits. But today, they're not in a good position. But if you see guys who've been here for a longer period of time, who've seen the entire sort of curve from the 03, 04 days, those guys are they don't get sort of thrown off by the recent press. Have they always been successful in India? No, they haven't always been successful. But then you look at the global environment and you see where is the money going. Amongst the emerging markets, there's Brazil, there's China, there's India. China has a bunch of its own issues. Brazil also has its own issues. India has its own issues also. But any smart, is when they come and spend time in India, they see the growth, not as you and I criticize or have an armchair discussion about, but they go to rural India, they see, you go to a 7-Eleven, you go to a Kedaara store, you see the way things are picking up. The story isn't broken. Right. So those guys are frankly there. There's a bunch of other investors who, again, are very large, who just haven't been exposed to India yet. And they are also recognizing that this is a great asset class they need some exposure to. So I would say, at the cost of, we have been fortunate, we've been lucky, and I've been humbled. So we, in a sense, it was the right thing at the right time, and we were humbled by the interest we saw. But I would just say to all the others who think that this industry is dead, this industry is always going to be there. I think the good thing which is happening in our industry is there were probably a plethora of GPs which erupted, and again, because of the 07, 08 issue, where money was being given out too freely. I think you've come back to a situation where investors, both direct and indirect, are being a lot more circumspect. They're being a lot more analytical. They're looking at the teams, the past performances a lot more rigorously. Right. And I think the good teams, there's enough money out there in the world that enough good teams in India will be funded.
But Manish, the stock markets right now have done very well despite all this uncertainty about India as a growth story. So do you feel actually the stock markets are bad news for private equity players because a lot of them will be tempted to exit at these levels? It's a great opportunity. Markets high. Why not get out of this and stay safe?
No, listen, I'll take a slightly contrarian view there, Namrata. I'm saying for the guys who can exit at the current market, they should. Listen, if they made good money...
You think if someone's made good money, they should exit right now?
No, I can't tell anyone what they should be doing. It has to be very specific to the investment at hand. I'm just saying for the bunch of guys who are feeling depressed because the markets were so low for the last 3 years, if some of them want an exit because they're nervous or whatever it might be, and it depends on the particular situation at hand. Obviously, for people like us, if we saw a huge growth and upside, no matter what the market is irrelevant, we'll hang on and hug to it, and we'd reinvest in it. But if either we're frustrated on India, we don't like the company, I see a small spike, I'll get out of it.
What are you doing?
Well, right now, we're going to start making investments in India.
Right.
So we're not in a position to start exiting at all in our current portfolio.
No, what are you doing in terms of identifying opportunities? Are you looking at sectors? Are you saying domestic growth stories?
So Namrata, that's a discussion we'll have 6 months later because we can't talk about it now.
Okay. Hopefully we speak in 6 months' time
Absolutely.
in a warmer climate.
Absolutely. We'd love to. Thank you, Namrata.
India's #1 news app. Just got even better. Download NDTV's new app. Fully optimized for retina display. Full screen view. Faster response time. And Sudoku. NDTV's new iPad app. Download now.